Thank you for listening to The Lawyer's Daughter. This is Jen Carroll, and this podcast does not have any video. I know I'm on YouTube, but that doesn't matter. I really appreciate you listening to the podcast here. Let's go get started. My friends, do I have a podcast for you today? It is Sunday, August 18th, and by the squeakiness of my chair, you can tell that I'm going to tell you to relax and enjoy this podcast. No thinking required. That's how well I have constructed this podcast today. You can literally let this wash over you in delight, because today I am just going to tell you stories, and I'm telling you, you don't have to think. This was so fun to put together. So what I have here is the conventions, and my title is Conventions Gone Wild, Wins and Disasters. So we're going to have fun today. We're going to, the bunch of people are traveling to the Democratic National Convention, which starts tomorrow. And let me just tell you, convention starts a little bit clunky because it's everybody coming to the business meeting, right? Like, what room am I supposed to be in? Do I have my badge? I'm checked in. Where's breakfast? Oh my God. All they have is dried pastries and bad coffee. Oh, it sounds like I've been to a million of these. And yet, who cares? Because you're having fun. So let's talk about conventions, and we're just going to dish. I just have stories for you that are, I really specifically went down the path of just using the two main parties and making sure I have stories from both sides, because that's how I want to do this podcast, is I want to include everybody. And they're great because it's a shared experience. That's the beauty of all this. Two parties used to be a good thing, used to be fun. We used to be frenemies, and we used to argue over things, and things changed, and we grew together, and it wasn't perfect. And this will tell you it wasn't perfect. And there's some things that we're still fighting for that blow my mind, like women and equality. Like, why is that so hard? But then we can't seem to get to people of color and equality either. I get why that's harder, but both of those things are so entrenched in who we are and who is representing us and how we get to change. And again, I don't care which side you're on, because I'm still going to tell you both sides are entrenched and changes become harder. Go back and listen to my Political Action Committee podcast, because that is one of the reasons it's gotten harder. But the reason I love conventions is it's really about us and our time with our candidates. Us being all us minions out here. Maybe that's how I should think of us all. We're just minions. We're all yellow, and we mama banana. Anyway, I love my minions. Shout out to the Woods. They love the minions too. So, okay, I'm going to just remember some of these things. This is just to tease you right now. In 1984, Mario Cuomo told the tale of two cities. He used the Democratic Convention to stage a contrast against Reagan's America. Now, mind you, we're going to talk about Reagan and Morning in America and all that, Reagan's America, but 1984 was the year this all was coming down. It was happening. Reagan had been president for 4 years, and he was running for re-election. So Mario Cuomo was working hard to contrast Reagan's America with the struggles of the working class and making an indelible impact. Interesting when you watch some of these political leaders from decades ago and where they are today. It's a shame in some ways. Okay, the next one is in 1990. Sorry, just reflecting on Mario Cuomo and his journey. I guess we all have our journeys, right? Pat Buchanan had a culture war speech in 1992. 1992 is the Clinton election. Clinton versus, Clinton versus Bush. Is this what I gotta go check. Anyway, it's hard to remember all these. Buchanan delivered a fiery speech at the Republican convention declaring a culture war in America, which polarized audiences and sparked widespread debate. So culture wars, there you go. Culture war debuted in 1992, and you can thank Pat Buchanan. And I'll just be quiet now because I was going to say bad things in a row. But that's when we saw the culture war start, 1992. Now you can feel badass because you know when that started. Willie Nelson had a surprise performance at the convention in 2000, and that he brought unexpected star power and excitement. And I suspect after 2000 is when we started seeing more stars show up, especially musical performers, show up at conventions. I bet Willie Nelson broke a little glass ceiling there. In 2000, we also had the Great Mac Attack, which was Al Gore's kiss when he laid one on Tipper right on stage, and he was trying to counter the criticism he was too stiff and uncharismatic. I guess you know what they say. Party in the front, business in the back. That's our Mr. Al Gore right there. We had in 2004, and I do not remember this, but it's hilarious, and I do not know how this all went down. But Zell Miller challenged Chris Matthews. You might remember Chris; he used to be on the television, to a duel. After his fire keynote at the Republican National Convention, Democrat Zell Miller challenged MSNBC's Chris Matthews to a duel during the contentious interview. Now you gotta love a duel in 2004. Unfortunately, I don't think the duel ever happened, but I really would have liked to seen a duel. And I wonder if they were going to duel with like lightsabers or swords or guns or those old timey guns that smoke when you shoot them and have a hell of a kickback. Old timey. That's me. I'm really classy that way. Do not know much about guns. Then there was in 2008, and you remember this. You know the difference between a hockey mom and a pit bull? Lipstick. Oh yeah, I added Southern to that because as an Alaskan, Sarah Palin had a great Southern accent. So I don't know that she had a Southern accent, but she definitely talked with a distinct affect. But it was in 2008 at the Republican National Convention when she introduced hockey moms and pit bulls are the same, but but the hockey moms wear lipstick. Challenge out there to all you hockey moms. You wearing lipstick right now? Does it freeze? Do you have a special kind of lipstick to sit in a hockey arena, tank? What is it? I've been to hockey games. What's that thing called with the ice and everything? An arena, I guess. All right. And then 2012, and I alluded to this in a previous podcast because this one still, as a rhetorician, this one still blows my mind because the convention, the technique he used, the trick of bringing a prop is a good trick. That's a solid rhetorical thing to do. Bring something, bring an object, bring a device, and use that device to help with your speech. I can do that if I'm talking about the Golden State Killer. I got devices I can use. I have a favorite shirt by far that I love wearing because it's a device that allows me to have a conversation, right? Well, Clint Eastwood in 2012 brought out the empty chair. And it was supposed to be him addressing an imaginary Barack Obama in the empty chair to criticize the president's performance. But instead it ended up being, oh God, it's so the word right now, but it really was weird. It was weird because it didn't work and he didn't have enough affect. And Clint Eastwood, I think, on his own, just standing there is kind of a unimpressive man. I mean, he's great in his acting, if you're into that cowboy stuff. But he couldn't pull off the empty chair. He didn't execute well. And it's a good thing. If you're a rhetorician, we study it because it's just a really good example of where using a device didn't work. And then in 2016, there was history made at the DNC as Hillary became the first woman to accept the party's nomination for president. And that is her shattering that glass ceiling. That was a big deal, a really big deal. And a good, I am a feminist. It's a good one for women. And then in 2016, we also, and I'm going to talk about it a little bit more here, I think, but we have Ted Cruz's non-endorsement speech at the Republican National Convention, and he shocked the crowd by refusing to endorse Donald Trump. And he encouraged people to vote their consciences said. And I'm going to talk about that in a minute here because that was actually a huge deal, a really big deal. So just those are things just to remind you of things that have happened. Conventions can have real ripple effects that they bubble out beyond the convention itself and have a life of their own. And those are the stories I want to share with you because it's funny how you think convention and blah, and I make jokes about it being like a giant business meeting where you're fighting for food and toilets, but it is more than that. And it has a way of changing our democracy and changing the narrative depending on what's going on. So let's go. Okay. So let's go look at when a convention's doing a really good job. I pulled two examples of conventions doing a really good job. The first was in 1980, which was the Morning in America. And this was when Ronald Reagan delivered a unifying speech that resonated with a nation weary of economic troubles and a sense of decline. And you have to remember, we had high inflation, unemployment, we had hostages in Iran, and Reagan's Morning in America speech message contrasted sharply with the Democrats' portrayal of a troubled nation under Jimmy Carter. Now, I think probably almost everybody has deep respect for Jimmy Carter because what he's done with his life post presidency is amazing. And if you don't know, go look at Habitat for Humanity. This man and his wife have given and given and given and given. But as a president, he wasn't necessarily the most inspirational leader. And as we've looked back now in history, we find out that he faced a lot of problems that we didn't know about that were happening behind the scenes, especially around those hostages. But nevertheless, we're going to talk about the convention. And we got this Morning in America, and this offered a vision of a renewed American greatness rooted in conservative values. So remember, we have this whole thing going on about, what did our good friend Pat Buchanan say? Culture war. Pat Buchanan started the culture war in 1992. So right now we're just starting to see in 1980 this bubbling of these values and conservative values. And if I had all my history together, I think we're going to see the Tea Party show up pretty soon, all those kind of things. I'm going to go back to my PACs. And I'm going to go back to your political action committees. And I did do a podcast on that because that's what triggers these guys to get involved. And there's stuff going on behind the scenes all the time. But as far as we're concerned, we're at home watching this and we hear about Morning in America and we hear about these conservative values. And television was the dominant medium. And the convention was broadcasting to millions of households supported by newspapers, radio, and direct mail. And Reagan's speech leveraged the emotional power of TV to inspire and mobilize voters, and it led to a landslide victory. He was elected. Jimmy Carter. It was a landslide. Jimmy Carter barely showed up on the votes, and a new conservative era in American politics. And I will deny this till the day I die, but my roommate will not let me live this down, so it's public knowledge because she's going to forever not let me live this down. I voted for Reagan in 1980. I absolutely did. And I voted for leadership. That's what I voted for. I felt like, okay, just kill me now. Go ahead. You can tell. This is why I can tell you. I can play in the middle because I use a lot of reasoning on how I vote. And this is the only time I think I voted for a Republican. But what I didn't like with Jimmy Carter is that we just didn't have leadership, and I didn't know what was going on behind the scenes. And I know a lot more about the presidency now. Of course, we all do because communications have changed. But there's one where I did get excited about Morning in America, and I did think that even the conservative values at that time, which is another big caveat, were baby conservative values. They were like, treat people well. No big government in our business. I mean, it was really the kind of conservative values we all used to kind of want, which is stay out of mind your own, what is it? MYOB, mind your own beeswax, is the one we grew up with. All right. So that's Morning in America. We're trying to find the conventions that really clicked. So 1980 really clicked. And then 12 years later in 1992, a new Democrat with a new covenant with America was the big push, and that was Bill Clinton. He was an up-and-coming governor from Arkansas, and he used the event to introduce himself to the American public and present his vision for a new Democrat approach. This approach aimed to bridge traditional liberal values with a centrist perspective, appealing to a broad range of voters. Interestingly, if you think about this from a values perspective, it kind of makes sense. We pivoted from Ronald Reagan to Clinton because if you think of what's in the middle, it's not that big of a transition, especially when conservative values in 1980 used to be far less conservative and much more moderate. Same thing then when you get a new moderate Democrat nominee in the covenant with America in 1992. And he brings his Southern, I was going to say Southern charm, but I don't think that's it. His Southern sensibility to moving us forward with new ideas, but not leaving people out. And so we have two Two great conventions. 1988 Republican Convention, 1992 Democratic Convention. Okay, so those are two examples of wins. But where's some bad? Let's spill the tea, right? What are some conventions that have gone wrong? This one you're going to hear a lot about, and I'm going to talk about it here, and I'm going to talk about it at the end of this podcast because it's a big deal. But the Democratic National Convention is going to be in Chicago starting tomorrow. There's a lot of people with a lot of memories. They're geezers, but also then the media is picking up on this and trying to, I guess, foreshadow this convention with what happened in 1968. So let me tell you, for those of you that were born not as when I was born, and I was even a baby for this one, at the 1968 Democratic National Convention in Chicago, there was dramatic turmoil both inside and outside the hall. On the streets, there were violent confrontations between anti-war protesters and police, and they were broadcast live on television. This is 1968. That's a big deal that this is coming into your living room for the first time like this. These kinds of protests and these kinds of, I will call them riots, but they weren't really riots. But you know, when you're watching it on TV, it looks like a riot because you have no way to really understand the breadth. You only get what's coming through the window of the camera lens, right? It created chaos and an unsettling spectacle for viewers across the country. And of course, it's associated with the convention. Inside, the delegates, these are Democratic delegates, were deeply divided over the Vietnam War, and it led to heated debates and visible fractures within the party. The extensive media coverage of the unrest and the internal discord intensified the perception of the Democrats being in disarray and contributing to their loss in the general election. So this is really interesting. This is where the convention itself, which I said, they're going there to define their platform and the planks in their platform and how they feel about different things. And they spent a good deal of time in 1968 arguing, and they couldn't get it. They couldn't find a middle ground, and they lost, which is freaking important. Gotta pay attention to that stuff. Okay, now the next one that went wrong was the 2016 Republican Convention. 2016, this should be in our memories. And it was marked by significant controversy over Donald Trump's nomination. I guess I just didn't realize how much the Republican Party was worked up about this. I think, again, because I was perceiving it through the media and mostly probably MSNBC, to be perfectly honest, by 2016. So chances are I had a skewed perspective or an incomplete perspective because I didn't go read was what I should have done. At the convention, the convention eventually ended up rallying around Trump. There were deep divisions within the party. And I told you I'd mention this. Ted Cruz refutably is not notably refused. Refutably is a different word entirely. Ted Cruz refused to endorse Trump during his speech. So I mentioned that at the top. That was a big deal. It exacerbated the rift in the party. And prominent Republicans like Mitt Romney and John Kasich distanced themselves from the convention or voiced their opposition, deflecting broader discontent within the party. So if you think about it, you've got Ted Cruz, who is not particularly in the middle of the Republican Party, but you do have your Mitt Romneys and your John Kasichs, who I would say, I guess they would be called rhinos now, but they're just normal Republicans that tended to not be super extreme, kind of more like a Reagan Republican, I guess I'd call them, trying to find middle ground. That's my armchair analysis. Please don't quote me. So the deal is, as this conflict was happening inside the hall over, Trump inevitably or ultimately becoming the candidate, the media played a crucial role in amplifying the conflict. Inside the convention hall, the tension was palpable as delegates clashed over Trump's candidacy. Outside, the media coverage focused on the discord among Republican leaders and the unconventional nature of Trump's campaign. Maybe it's because I was raising a teenager. I just don't remember this. It shaped the public perception and added to the overall controversy. The media's portrayal contributed to the heightened scrutiny and skepticism around Trump's candidacy, which continued to influence the landscape throughout his presidency. So the tone was set at the convention, and that is actually a really important part of the convention. is how it establishes a tone. And if you feel really good about things when you leave, or if you feel really bad, motivating people by making them feel bad is not motivation. That's what you do to your children when they screw up, and you still don't want to make them feel bad. You just want to make them understand they made a bad choice. I don't want them to feel bad. So motivating people by making them feel bad is never a great tactic. So let's talk about when conventions go crazy. And really, it's about balloons. It's all about balloons. These political conventions don't always have to have the seriousness of nominating candidates and debating things. Sometimes they get to have fun, but it's funny because what most of us really love on the last night are the balloons. I just would love to be in that room when those balloons fall. But I've never been. Maybe someday it's still time for me to get to a convention, maybe in 4 more years. Who knows? But at the Republican convention in 1988, there was a balloon explosion. The convention was held in New Orleans, and the organizers planned a massive balloon drop to celebrate George Herbert Walker Bush's, that's number one, Papa Bush, as Rachel Maddow calls him, Papa Bush's nomination. However, it turned into an unforgettable moment when the balloon, this is so hilarious, because wait till I tell you about the next one. The balloon release mechanism malfunctioned, causing thousands of balloons to explode simultaneously in a loud, colorful burst. The sudden explosion of the balloons filled the convention hall with cheers and laughter and joy. And it really shifted it into a celebration and a party. And it's 1988, and they had a great time, the Republicans. And it's hilarious that balloons malfunction. And it's hilarious because in 1996, at the Democratic National Convention, Bill Clinton was ready to accept the nomination. He's on the stage. This is in, I don't have the town, but he's ready to go. And, and every moment was meticulously timed. So if you've done event organizations, just like the Republicans, you got to time everything. And just as Clinton finished his acceptance speech, the signal was given to release the thousands of red, white, and blue balloons from the ceiling. But something went wrong. The release mechanism malfunctioned, and instead of a single awe-inspiring drop, the balloons trickled down almost mockingly in a slow, random sets. Then, just as the moment passed, the mechanism, and it's always blamed on a mechanism, right? The mechanism, probably a human, but the mechanism overcompensated and unleashed a second unplanned wave of balloons that lasted seemingly forever. The balloons just coming down and coming down and coming down. And Clinton and Gore had to playfully dodge the balloons as they tried to exit the stage. It was captured on television. I'm going to try to go catch both of these in video. And these malfunctions ended up causing outrageous delight. So that's how you let a convention go crazy. It's just all about balloons. All right, so now, maybe have there been conventions that have really changed the course of history or created history or in some way feel historic in a really powerful way. One is the 1948 Democratic National Convention in Philadelphia. Considered a pivotal moment in reshaping the party and the nation, the convention was deeply divided over civil rights. Okay, 1948, guys, we are in and out of wars in 1948. We are in this little time of privilege where we can look up and kind of figure out what we want to be in the 1950s, right? And civil rights is there. The convention was deeply divided over civil rights, with Southern Democrats, known as the Dixiecrats, strongly opposing any pro-civil rights platform. I just want to smack y'all. I just want to smack you. I don't understand why you fight against other people having civil rights. That is just not who we are. Put that back. I'm going to put my soapbox back under my desk. I did not know this because later I had a crush on him. This is 1948, so it would be much later. He must have had hair at this time in 1948. Minneapolis Mayor Hubert Humphrey took the stage in a bold and electrifying move. He delivered a passionate speech, urging the party to get out of the shadow of the states' rights and walk forthright into the bright sunshine of human rights. Humphrey's speech galvanized the convention in 1948, leading to an adoption of a strong civil rights plank in the party platform. There's that plank. The decision caused Southern delegates to walk out and protest, eventually forming the states' rights Democratic Party, Dixiecrats. You know that's going to be a political action committee, right? Which ran its candidate in the 1948 election. So they had their own candidate. That would be appropriate. Remember, conventions are where we decide, so you could bring your own candidate in the party. That makes sense. Despite the schism, the Democrats went on to win the presidency under Harry Truman, and Humphrey's speech is credited with laying the groundwork for the civil rights movement within the Democratic Party. There you go, babies. You want to go back to who started civil rights? Little did I know when I was crushing on him when I was 8 years old, Herbert Humphrey was there for civil rights, but he was. Then we go to 1964 in the Republican National Convention in San Francisco, and Senator Barry Goldwater, the party's presidential nominee, delivered a fiery acceptance speech. This is 1964, that included the line, "Extremism in the defense of liberty is no vice." So extremism is not a vice. It's I guess he's saying it's required. Moderation in the pursuit of justice is no virtue. So he's saying it's not bad to be extreme, and moderation pursuing justice is not a good thing. I guess you have to be not moderate. You have to be extreme. But and extremism is not bad. That's what he's saying. This statement shocked the modern wing of the Republican Party and solidified Goldwater's image as a staunch conservative, willing to push the party toward a more hardline stance. That's in 1964, guys. Goldwater's nomination and speech were pivotal in the realignment of American politics. His campaign marked the beginning of the conservative movement that would later lead to Ronald Reagan's presidency. So this is 1964, and we have Reagan running in 1980. So it's, 16 years later. And there's Nixon is in there in between. So there you go. There's your Republican history. But Goldwater's nomination speech were pivotal for this realignment. It led to Ronald Reagan's presidency and it reshaped the GOP. And even though Goldwater lost in 1964 to Lyndon Johnson, the incumbent, his convention speech was really a defining moment in history. So here you have Hubert Humphrey associated with civil rights and Barry Goldwater associated with the conservative movement. Those are two fundamental parts of our history. Often during a convention, there's crap going down outside. So, and that's a lot of the grassroots efforts. So I've talked about how to get involved in campaigns. I've talked a lot about the benefit of grassroots. I've talked about how we are the grassroots. It is us, how we can show up with our bodies and our mouths and our brains and our signatures and make a difference. Well, here's two examples of grassroots activities happening outside of conventions. One was during the 1972 Republican National Convention, which interestingly was held in Miami. It was President Richard Nixon seeking re-election in 1972, and while the convention inside was relatively smooth, sorry, I was like checking my dates. While the things were going smoothly inside, thousands of anti-war protesters, frustrated by how Nixon was handling the Vietnam War, gathered in Miami to voice their dissent. They couldn't get close to this tightly secured convention center, so they decided to change what they were doing. And they showed up at the White House. And this is called the White House lawn protests of 1972. In the evening of the convention's final day, the protesters gathered outside the White House, staging a massive silent vigil on the lawn. That's my kind of protest. This is before mobile phones, people, so you were really silent. Carrying candles and signs, they lined the perimeter, creating a hauntingly peaceful contrast to the fiery speeches happening in Miami. The media captured the juxtaposition with images of Nixon being nominated in Miami, while at the same time his policies were being silently protested in D.C. This event was a powerful reminder of the deep divisions, of the country. And it really highlighted the influence of grassroots activism. And let's go back, because in 1968, it had happened on the Democratic side. Oh, on the blog, I should change the order of these by date. Okay, so at the Democratic National Convention, and this is important because it was in Chicago. As the delegates were gathering inside the amphitheater, the International Amphitheater in Chicago, the city streets were different stories. Tensions over the Vietnam War, civil rights, and social justice boiled over, leading to massive protests. The epicenter of this turmoil was Grant Park, where thousands of demonstrators gathered to protest the Democratic Party's support for the war. Is Grant Park where they put the bean? It might be. Anyway, this is important because this is, you know how you have triggers and PTSD about things and you have bad memories? For some, what happened in Chicago in 1968 is a bad memory, and they're worried about going to Chicago now. Not worried, but concerned. And I've seen a lot of posts on Twitter reminding delegates and people attending the convention to just be aware. They don't want to be part of somebody's attempt to grab a headline, and keep their eyes open. And so that is some of the shadow over what's going on in Chicago. What started as a peaceful protest in Grant Park escalated quickly into chaos when the police moved in to disperse the crowd. I don't know why they moved in to disperse the crowd, but then I wasn't there. The situation deteriorated into what many later called a police riot, with officers using tear gas and batons and brute force. The protests were broadcast on TV, as I mentioned at the top of this podcast, shocking the nation, and it led to widespread condemnation because we as Americans, if we are not good at one thing, we are really good about telling the TV what to do. That's just how we do it. We yell at our TVs. That is like a thing. The scenes from Grant Park overshadowed the convention itself, with commentators and the public more focused on the violence in the streets than the speeches themselves inside. The event became a defining moment of the 1960s, illustrating the deep divisions within our culture. It's funny because they were also, fighting inside. This is out in the streets. I wanted to really focus on what people were doing outside the convention, non-convention attendees with these last two stories. But we know inside the convention, it was turmoil too. So when you come to a convention without your ducks in a row, your ducks just quack and quack and quack and quack. It can be a real mess. All right, so we're wrapping up. The Democratic Convention is starting tomorrow. And historically, I was really interested in this answer. Historically, Democratic conventions tend to attract more protesters than Republican conventions, primarily because the Democratic Party often includes a broader coalition of groups with diverse and sometimes conflicting interests. As a result, activist groups, including those on the left, can use convention momentum to push for more aggressive policies. It's interesting because civil rights, social justice, and anti-war movements also tend to show up more often at Democratic conventions. Republican conventions also see protests, but they're often from groups opposed to the party's platform rather than from within. These protests tend to focus on issues like abortion rights, LGBTQ rights, and immigration policies. So there you go. That's the big ones that really get people lit up if they're looking at a Republican convention. Another one is guns, but that's also taken, it's kind of have its own life, and it's getting tackled legislatively more now than as a demonstration at a convention. So here's the scoop. Tomorrow's convention's in Chicago, and I've taken a look, and I tried to use the most generic reporting possible. So I went to PBS because I figured it's just got to be generic, right? And looking at that, just the generic reporting, they're expecting 20,000 activists to rally around issues. 20,000. That's a fair amount of people. High school football games don't get 20,000. College football games. College football, you probably get 80,000. Well, what do I know? 20,000 still feels like a lot of people to me. Rallying around, the issues they're going to rally around are ceasefire in Gaza, abortion rights, and economic justice. They are taking positions, the activists typically take positions that are in contrast with the platform. And right now, they want an immediate ceasefire in Gaza, which is more aggressive than the party's current platform. But also, I would tell you that the Democratic Party is in a kind of weird over this one because Kamala's not president. She hasn't won any elections. And you can't say she hasn't done X, Y, Z. It's not her administration. This is still Joe Biden's administration. And that what we want to have happen, what anybody wants to have happen to help relieve these foreign conflicts, it's hard to know what the candidate's going to do until she comes with her platform this week. So we'll find out. And then, let's see. I think what the thing to watch, sorry, I'm just wrapping this up, but the thing to watch is to watch how adjustments are made to the platform and how adjustments are made to the messaging based on how the events play out over the next 4 days. And again, I know it's the Democratic convention, but you can do this for any convention. You want to see if a party can live, breathe, learn, and adapt. Those are healthy things to do. All of us change our minds over time based on new information and evidence. And so should a party platform. And frankly, so should leaders. So that's really what I watch for when I sit down to watch the convention over the next few days. Tomorrow, I'm going to come in and share some of the symbolism and what to watch for. So this is just, again, this will be a little bit fun, but these are some of the, I'll call them convention norms because I'm all about norms right now. I feel like they all got blown up. And if we get back to some of our norms, a lot of us would have just more comfort. It just takes the stress off of us as humans if norms are operating healthily. So that's what I want to talk about tomorrow is what are the convention kinds of things that you will look for and see and that should make you feel good that our democracy is working. Thank you for listening today. I hope you enjoyed that journey. Super fun. I know I nerd out, but I really do love this stuff. And thank you for joining me in these conversations. Until tomorrow. Thank you for listening to today's podcast. Make sure you subscribe and rate, and I'll be back with another episode really soon.